With so many Bibles out there, which one is the most accurate Bible of them all? That's what we're looking at in this video, the most accurate Bible. Hello, my name is Stephen, and this is Faith Ministries. I've been doing a few videos recently on various translations of the Bible, and a friend of mine asked me, so what is the most accurate Bible? If I have to do a Bible study, what Bible should I use to get the most accuracy out of in a translation? And so I decided to do a brief video as looking at what is the most accurate Bible. Now, before you jump down my neck, I'm not saying that it is the most readable Bible, or it is the one which agrees the most with your denomination or your theology or your doctrines. I'm just going off what other people and myself have looked into and believe is the most accurate Bible. Now, I looked at a few different charts, I suppose you would call them, of the translations of the Bibles going from left to right. And I picked the four most Bibles on the left-hand side that were the most closest to being the most accurate. On the left-hand side of the translation charts, there was the formal equivalent, in other words, the word-for-word translation of the Bible. And one of them had the Interlinear, the American Standard Version, the King James Version, and the New King James Version. Then the next 2, 3, 4, and 5 all had the Interlinear, New American Standard Bible, Amplified, and the English Standard Version. And then finally, the sixth one I had a look at, it had the New American Standard Bible, the King James, the English Standard Version, and the New English Translation. They didn't have the Interlinear. And so what that was saying to me was, even just looking at those charts, that the one that stuck out the most was the Interlinear, and secondly, the New American Standard Bible. So which is the most accurate translation? The variety, as you know, of modern English translations of the Bible, you only have to go into a Christian bookshop these days, is basically as varied as the number of denominations and churches around the world today. There are many ways of comparing the translations. Some, like the New Living Translation, they're made to be read easily. You can sit down and read it with a cup of coffee. It's like a novel. Some, like the English Standard Version, they try to preserve the poetic flow of language that was found in the original King James Version. But in essence, there are two methods of translation. There is the formal equivalent, or word for word, looking at from the Greek and the Hebrew and into English. And then we have the dynamic equivalence, or a thought for thought translation. And then thirdly, there is the paraphrases, which aren't really translations. They're more paraphrasing what is trying to be said in the Gospels, in the Bible, into modern day vernacular. Now, the formal equivalence, it takes the literal words of the original language, whether it be Hebrew or Greek, and translates them into the closest equivalent words of English or French or Italian or whatever the language is that you're translating into. Often the formal equivalence, it sacrifices readability for the sake of being accurate in translation. On the other hand, you have the dynamic equivalence, which attempts to express each thought in an original way by using the most natural expressions and idioms of the day. So in other words, as the years go by, people trying to change them to be more readable for the particular time. This makes for better readability, and it makes the Bible come alive when you're reading the stories of Jesus and miracles and things like that. It brings them to life to people these days. Often there are times when what is being said in the Bible, if you're looking at a formal equivalence, it can be obscured by difficult language and phrases that were used at the time. And therefore, the dynamic equivalence translation, it can make it more understandable. and you can sort of say, ah, yeah, I get that. I understand that. However, one thing I've noticed is that relying upon the translator's judgment can bring into effect an error which comes from their own judgment, comes from their bias, which they have, from their training and from their doctrine that they have, even from their church background. You can have people who you read something, you think, wow, that doesn't really sit with the way I've been brought up in my church or the doctrine that I believe. And it's interesting listening to some preachers or ministers preach. And because of the churches they come from, they tend to gravitate towards certain Bibles because they line up with the doctrine of their church at the time. But what most translators do try to do is go back to the source. The translators used as their source the most original language manuscripts available in their day. Over the years, more and more manuscripts have been found, but back years ago, they only had what they had available. For example, the Roman Catholic Church in early centuries, they only used the Latin Vulgate. The Reformers of the 16th century, they went back to the manuscripts in the original languages of the Bible, Hebrew and Greek. And while the Jewish scholars, the Masoretes, had done an excellent job in preserving and copying the Old Testament scriptures and saving them for future generations, the Greek manuscripts weren't as preserved and weren't as copied as well, and many of them were lost and destroyed. In 1536, Udo Erasmus compiled and published a Greek edition of the New Testament. And then over the years, Erasmus's Greek Testament was published and republished and came to be known as in Latin, Textus Receptus, or the received text. It was the Textus Receptus that formed the basis of the New Testament for the King James Version, as well as Martin Luther in the Lutheran Church's German translation of their Bible. In the mid-1800s, a couple of gentlemen called Westcott and Hort, they did extensive research into the ancient Greek manuscripts of the New Testament because more and more manuscripts were being discovered at the time. Their goal was to decipher from the existing manuscripts the reading that was most likely to be like the original. And in the process, they developed principles that form the basis of many modern translations of the Bible today. In their research, they preferred two manuscripts known as the Codex Vaticanus and the Codex Sinaiticus, both ancient manuscripts of the Alexandrian text type. Westcott and Hort, they published their Greek New Testament in 1881, and in 1885, the English Revised Version, which you may have heard of, was published based on their new critical way of looking at it. In 1901, the American Standard Version was published, which was an update from the RSV. From the American Standard Version, there came the Amplified Version in 1965. And then in 1995, along came the New American Standard Version. And as you know, there have been dozens and dozens and dozens of translations over the years, some being more formal, others being more dynamic, and others being paraphrases. One of the Bibles that sticks out from those lists of formal word-for-word equivalents was the Interlinear Bible. Many of you may not have actually come across it. This is a copy of the Interlinear Bible. It's a big book. It has line upon line upon line, the Hebrew and then the English, and then in the New Testament, line upon line of Greek and the English equivalent underneath that. The thing to note is that the Interlinear Bible is not a translation as we understand it, and it is not meant to be. It's good because you simply get an accurate translation of the exact word-for-word translation of the Hebrew and the Greek into English without any doctrine, without any theological bent being put on those particular words. A lot of people find that the Interlinear Bible is great for in-depth word studies. That besides like Strong's Concordance and that sort of thing, if you're really wanting to dig in and extract the most meaning possible from specific words or phrases, it creates a way for any student of Scripture to take a specific Greek or Hebrew word and receive a direct English translation. And so if you're really wanting to stay as close and accurate to the Greek or the Hebrew translation of the Bible as possible, I highly recommend you check out the Hebrew and Greek Interlinear Bible. And then we come to the second most favored Bible as far as being the most accurate, and that is the New American Standard Bible. And that has been changed a few times from when it came out to the newer one in 1995 to new ones like this last couple of years. But it holds the reputation. Most people would agree that it holds the most reputation for being the most accurate Bible in English. And because the New American Standard Bible is the most accurate Bible translation, it is also the most literal word-for-word translation of the Bible. This means that compared to others, it is more difficult to read. Not hard, but slightly more. When they took out the these and the thous in the Old English, it became a lot more, in 1995, it became a lot more readable than the older version. What many people appreciate about the New American Standard Bible translation is that it distinguishes versions that are not clearly Scripture, because they weren't found in the oldest Greek, they weren't found in the oldest Greek manuscripts at the time. And therefore, the New American Standard Bible have put them as footnotes. They haven't taken them completely out, but they've put them as footnotes, which means it becomes invaluable for those who are worried about getting the most accurate translation possible. The New American Standard Bible is translated using critical text from the Nestle-Aland's Novum Testamentum Graece, as well as Dead Sea Scrolls. So let's just have a look at a few scriptures. Here we have reading from Galatians chapter 2, verse 20. In the Greek English Interlinear Bible, it says, Christ has been crucified with, but I live, no longer I, lives but in me Christ. But that which now I live in flesh, in belief I live, in the one of the Son of God, of the one loving me and delivering himself up for me. As you can see, it is a really, really literal translation of the original Greek. And then we come up to the New American Standard Bible of 1995, and it says, I have been crucified with Christ, and it is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself up for me. One of the other popular ones for the formal translation is the English Standard Bible. And it says, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. And as a comparison, we'll have a look at the New King James Version. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. It might be worth your while going back and just having a look at the New American Standard Bible and even the Interlinear as to how that compares. And then in Genesis 37, verse 3, the idea of many colors with Joseph's coat of many colors, it comes from the Septuagint reading, which was a really early, before the time of Jesus's time, an early translation of the Hebrew into Greek. Hebrew uses a rare term that most likely means a coat of long sleeves or finely woven. In any case, it was a coat of royalty. However, this verse tends to show the influence of the Septuagint, which is the translation of Hebrew into Greek, as I said, and historical translations of many modern critical translations. And so if we have a look at that particular scripture, in the Interlinear Bible, verse 3, it says that Genesis, And Israel loved Joseph more all that his sons, for a son of old age he was to him, and he made for him a long coat reaching to the feet. Those of you who are into Star Wars, you may think that sounds a bit like Yoda. And Israel loved Joseph more all than his sons, for a son of old age he was to him, and he made for him a long coat reaching to the ground. Sounds cute. King James Version, which most of us are familiar with, says, now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made a coat of many colors, which is where we have the musical, A Coat of Many Colors, and where it came from, because they took it from that particular version. The New American Standard Bible of 1995 says, now Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons, because he was the son of his old age. He made him a very colored tunic, or a full-length robe. And finally, the Amplified Bible, the Classic Edition, it says, now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a distinctive long tunic. So there you have it. You may agree or you may disagree, but if you really want an accurate Bible to read, then go for the Interlinear, Hebrew and Greek. But the next best thing, I believe, is the New American Standard Bible of 1995, or maybe one of the newer ones. In order to know, the will of God, we must recognize that the Bible is our only guide in this matter, no matter what is happening in our lives or around the world. Each Christian should be, according to Colossians 1, verses 9 to 10, filled with the accurate knowledge of his will, in all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so as to walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to him, bearing fruit in every good work, and increasing in the accurate knowledge of God. And to get the accurate knowledge of God, we need an accurate Bible. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please like and subscribe and share to your friends so more and more people may see it. Until next time, God bless.